Hello and welcome to Gaming History 101. My name is Sasha and I'll be your host today. I don't think I need to tell you that the Sony PlayStation is one of the best-selling consoles of all time. From its beginnings as a Super Nintendo CD, which I talked about in episode 1 if you want to go check that out. Nope, no plugging or anything. To its final release in Japan on my birthday, 6 years before I was born, it's brought upon the world some of the most timeless classic games and franchises of all time. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the history from the Super Nintendo CD on of the PlayStation, as well as what happened before the idea of the Super Nintendo was a thing. So, yeah, let's go. Our story begins in 1986. CDs and CD-ROMs are still, at this point, very, very primitive. However, primitivity is key, and primitive things lead to innovation. Well, I feel like Confucius after saying that. I should get paid to do that. In 1986, Sony teamed up with Philips to create the CD-ROM XA. You might say, oh wow, a new 2 letters at the end of the name, a new black fire magic. What's the difference? The thing with the CD-ROM is that it can only access audio, video, or data at once. However, the CD-ROM XA could get all 3 of these at the same time, depending on, what it needed. By combining these 3 elements together, something awesome was created, which paved the way for gaming to take over. Using this technology, games could access files, graphics, and music all at the same time while being read on a single disc. At this point, the events of episode 1 take place, and if you want to go see that, again, links up here, down there, or cards up here, or the box, or whatever the hell happens, I don't know. So if you're interested, feel free to pause this video and watch that first. I'll wait. I mean, I'm a part of a video, so I kind of have to wait, but moving on, before the PS1 was released, most if not every single successful game system before its time used cartridges. While these were very fast in terms of reading data and getting stuff to the screen as fast as possible, they were very expensive to produce and in turn made them a lot more expensive to buy. The materials needed to make one of these often cost a lot more than they were worth. Especially with the transitions to 3D, while on paper, cartridges seemed like a better idea, the storage solutions needed to actually store the data on these, they were very expensive and not a lot of people would be able to afford them. Programming something like Resident Evil 2 for the N64 with the compressed FMV video on the cartridge really blows my mind to think, how could they fit something that big on something that could max hold like 64 megabytes of data? That blows my mind. I don't get it. Now, as I just said, the biggest N64 games were 64 megabytes, and that was pretty much all Nintendo got before the GameCube was released. But the PlayStation games, while they were on CDs and they did have loading times, they could store 700 megabytes on one disc. That's like 12 of these. Off the top of my head, I don't have a specific statistic to back that up, but you get the point. Sony decided to stick to CDs because manufacturing costs were lower than making cartridges, as all you needed was a high-speed copy machine. And you could fit 700 megabytes on something that was only 12 inches long. By this point, Sony had spent years developing the PS1. However, they had one big issue. Unlike their competitors and non-competitors, depending on who you considered which, they didn't have any in-house development studios. Thus, in November '93, Sony formed Sony Computer Entertainment. The system was slated to release in Japan the following year, but that amount of time certainly wasn't enough to give their upcoming system a full slate of launch titles. Due to the decisions of using CDs as the medium for the console, Sony had the support of a lot of third-party developers for reasons of convenience. You see, PC gaming had already jumped onto the CD-ROM bandwagon, so game publishers and developers already knew the benefits. CD-ROMs held way more memory than floppy disks, 700 megabytes as opposed to 1.44 megabytes, or cartridges. For example, the N64 could only hold 64 megabytes on one cartridge, max. Plus, the PlayStation CDs could interlace audio, visuals, and data simultaneously, so they could meet the demanding needs necessary for a 3D rendered game or FMV cutscene. Also, the production cost was a lot lower than any other media, and they could be quickly manufactured in mass quantities. For the time it took for a factory to solder one N64 cart, 10 PS1 CDs could be copied from one master through the use of high-speed CD copiers. That's not a real statistic, I just pulled that off the top of my head. The benefits of a major disc-based system, especially one as powerful as the PS1's touted capabilities, had these third-party publishers and developers chomping at the bit to develop for it. They jumped on the bandwagon en masse. The partnerships between Sony and the developers allowed them to start early and allow the system to launch with a huge selection of games, with a constant stream of new games, releasing pretty much damn near every week. The PlayStation was shown off at various trade shows with different designs for the system and controller, which I'd like to bring attention to. First, this is a photo of a Sony News workstation. Different parts from Sony News workstations were reused in some of the earliest PS1 development kits. Wait, what is that controller? Kinda looks like a weird 6-button Sega Genesis controller, doesn't it? Actually, it's a prototype PS1 controller. Weird, isn't it? Here's a less faded controller, which is exactly the same thing. If you'll notice, there are plus and minus buttons. Looking at the back of that controller, there's only one pair of shoulder buttons. Call it a hunch or whatever you want, but I believe these plus and minus buttons later became the R2 and L2 buttons that we know today on the regular PS1 controller. Moving on, here's another prototype design for the PS1 controller. This one has a nipple for a button, and 3 buttons expanding from said nipple. I don't know why, but this reminds me of the Atari 5200 trackball controller for some reason. I really hope I'm not the only one. Here's another prototype controller, and here we are back at the Genesis 6-button controller lookalike contest. They added the handles here, and it's starting to look something like the final one, and this one, well, what are those buttons? They look like broken off pieces of bread if you ask me. It's still an interesting design. Here's a picture with a bunch of prototype controller designs, and there's actually what looks like a prototype PS1 console. And finally, here's a picture of what looks like a diagram of every prototype controller they've ever gone through to get through the final PS1 controller design. And that's basically all there is to know about the development of the PlayStation post-Super Nintendo CD debacle. A lot of these designs for the early versions were pretty interesting to say the least, and I'd actually be interested to know where they would have gone if those designs were the ones they went with, instead of the final. Now this isn't really game related or video game related at all, but I still think it's interesting to mention. Some audiophiles have mentioned that the Sony PlayStation 1 SCPH1001 model is one of the best CD players of all time. Apparently something about the DAC configuration makes CDs higher in quality, comparable to some really high-end $6,000 CD players or something. I don't know. And people seem to like it, so yeah, if you want to go hoard a bunch of SCPH1001s, then, you know, feel free. You're probably a scumbag, but, you know, do what you want. If you like this video, be sure to click up here in the cards to see the last 2 videos uploaded on this channel, as well as the social media handles up here and in the description below. And if you'd like to, then please send me ideas on what to make videos on, and just drop a comment or DM me on Instagram or Twitter, or tweet at me or comment on the Instagram posts or something. I don't know. Do something interesting, because then I'll be more likely to make your video. Or, I don't know. I'll figure it out. But if this is the right part for today, this has been Gaming History 101. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.